let me start this.
Okay, you ready? Let me know, thumbs up, whatever you want to give me. All right. We'll get started if we'd all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you, everyone. Before we get into our agenda, as we want to be mindful of our mission and vision as we go through our agenda and make decisions. Tonight, our vision, inspiring all learners to be engaged and successful. Our mission, to provide an enriching environment to meet the needs of all learners. And our core value of respect, integrity, students first, and excellence. So, as we go through the agenda, please be mindful of all that. So, before we approve the agenda, there's been one update.
We added, it's letter D on the screen. You just had just D in your original agenda. The request for modified allowable growth and supplemental aid, we got that number late this afternoon, so that's something we should recommend to approve, and that's for our special ed deficit from last year.
So what we need is a motion to approve the agenda with the additional request for modified allowable growth and supplemental aid.
Make a motion to approve the agenda with the added item, new business item D.
Thank you, Tom. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. Consent items. The hearing to delegates, I don't see that we have any. We're at the consent items then. And I know, Tom, you had a chance to look at the invoices. Did you have any comments?
Invoices were in great shape. Had a couple of late ones come in after the list was prepared. We took care of those.
Okay.
We had one change of a purchase order from canceled one company and a different company for uniforms to get here on time. Everything's correct on the screen.
Okay. And as you know, you all received those in your packet earlier.
The three that are changed are highlighted on the invoices, so you'll know which ones those are.
As you look at revenues, expenses in comparison, you'll see that our expenses are up in comparison to year to date. That would be ESSER stuff, additional ESSER expenses, and the revenue part of that is not included because we claim those dollars back, and that first quarter claim doesn't start till till I think November 1st. So our expenses are higher because we haven't claimed back the revenue yet. But that and we'll see that kind of stuff for 2 years as our ESSER dollars are spent.
Expenses will be up regardless.
They will be. You're right. Our expenses will be up. Yeah.
Consider.
I make a motion to approve the consent items.
Thanks, Andrea. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Gloria. We have a motion and a second, or any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent items approved. Next, we got board reports, and as we've done in the past, as the school year gets started, we try to adopt a building and board members. And so the list was kind of in front of you that was sent out. High school usually has 2, middle school 2, and Lucia Bryant and Bertha has 1. So is there any preference by anybody out there right now that we can get a building assigned, and we'll make sure the principals of the building are aware, and hopefully you're able to communicate to you team needs and other things going on.
I'll do the middle school.
Thanks, Jay. Well, nobody has a preference. I would take Brian. I haven't been to Brian in a long time, so I would take Brian.
I'd like to rotate. I guess could rotate all the buildings, so I would go to Lucia Wallace this year.
Okay. That leaves Bertha to high school and a middle school.
High school. I don't think I've ever been in high school.
Okay. Well, as far as
I was in board rep.
yeah, board rep, yeah. All right. So we have high school, middle school, and Bertha.
Whatever. I can take Bertha.
Okay, thanks, Gloria. And we'll just, Todd will assign which one you may not want, Andrea. You get to have first choice.
I'll do the middle school since I've
Okay.
never done the
Middle school. At least Todd, what, for high school then?
Yep.
Thank you, everyone, and please, as you get a chance, hopefully you get a chance to be in the buildings more, walk around, talk to teachers, principals, anybody, and just get a feel for the day-to-day things that go on there every day, so. All right, we'll move on into superintendent's report.
Yeah, we're off to a great start. The school year has been off to a fast start. I think we're 4 weeks in already, which it's hard to believe it's that much. Like I put in the report, COVID certainly has impacted us. The numbers are changed every day. You know, today we had 10 to 15 students who are positive and 5 to 10 staff, but certainly we do have an impact, and that's the intent of that, is to let you know that. And it's something I assume will continue to be our reality for the foreseeable future, and we'll keep a daily monitor on it, which we do, and we'll share the information with our staff and families periodically. A couple weeks ago, we sent some information out, and we didn't last week, and we probably will again this week, just to let everyone know where we're at. We certainly want to be transparent and let everyone know how things are in our buildings. I did list our procedures and protocols. We worked and collaborated with our local public health to develop these, to stay home if you're ill, get tested, returning to school after illnesses, the parameters around that. What if you do test positive? Who needs to quarantine? And I think a big part of that is those are just in-home exposures, not school exposures, not on the bus exposures. Those are simply in-home exposures. And then the last part about getting vaccinated. So I think those things have allowed us to get off to a great start. That's allowed us to stay healthy. We do have, I said, 10 to 15 students. We do have more students than that out because of at-home exposures, not exposures in our schools, but someone in the house being positive. We have a lot more of that than we have positive students in our district. There's no question, probably 2/3 to 1/3. Enrollment, taking a look at that, we always look at these with hesitation. October 1st is when we certify our enrollment, and we certify our certified enrollment. Those are our resident students, and there's a lot more kids who go to school in our buildings than our resident students. But this is just to give you an idea, kind of a quick glance at the kids who are in our building. We do think our enrollment's good. I always hesitate to say our enrollment's up, but you guys can see those numbers that in comparison to when we pulled the numbers the first week of school last year, in comparison to this year, we have more students, which is great. That's awesome. We in a rural school district like ours, if we can not lose, that's a victory, and we certainly think that we have more this year. You can see the big, we're about the same at a little bit up at Bertha Godfrey. We're up at Bryan Elementary. Exactly the same at Lucia Wallace. The big one was the middle school, where we took a really big class, our 8th graders, and moved them to high school, and our middle school number was still up. I think we had 43 new students in our middle school, new to the district in the middle school this year. So that's a place where we really see an increase in comparison to the year before. Like I said, we'll certify our enrollment on October 1st. Something I want to create a little discussion with you guys on is our long-term sub-pay, which is Board Policy 410.1, which is one of our policies that we'll have the first reading of this month, and then next month we could look at any changes if we see any. But a few months back, we set our substitute rate, which is good for this year. But what we have is when a substitute reaches their 10th day working in a district in a long-term sub situation, they're then reimbursed at the per diem salary, and that is also dependent upon their academic, if they're BA plus 10 or masters or whatever that may be. If they are then sick and they miss a day, or they have to miss a day for any reason, they then go back to the regular sub rate. So if they're there 11 days in a row, but then they're sick, and they go home for a day and they come back, they don't come back at that same rate. I think it's something to consider, what we can do to change that. There would be some changes such as, you could provide sick days, or you could provide personal days. I would hesitate to do that, because those are benefits that we give to our full-time employees. And those are taxpayer-paid benefits as well. They don't have those, but something we could do to balance that out is just pay the long-term sub rate all the way through, from day one until they're done. Couple things. Number one, I think that's a fair thing to do. Districts certainly have that policy. Number two, anything we can do to encourage substitutes to work in our building, I think, is a really positive thing. There's no question. We've talked as a group about the teacher shortage. We have a substitute shortage as well, and we're feeling that every day in our buildings right now. And I think if there's something we can do to help with that, I don't know if this is directly, but any encouragement would be good at this time. Any feedback or thoughts on that long-term sub pay?
So you're talking long-term, like they're for the same teacher for a long amount of time. It's
Yeah.
not subbing in different rooms so many days in a row.
Correct.
No, it could still be 8 days in social studies and then 5 days in science, and that'd still be consecutive days in the district, right?
Yeah, but in that case, when we wouldn't know, we wouldn't start them at that rate then. The only time we'd start them from day one is if we're hiring them to cover someone who's going to be out for 2 months or something like that, which,
For long-term sub.
right. If we had the situation where they were there, 8 and 5, like you said, they would change at day 10. I don't think that's a typical thing.
Before the same person.
Has to be for the same person in our policy. Okay.
Do we struggle, we struggle to find sub, but it's long-term even. Or some people like long-term, at least they're consistent. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we get really good subs to come in and do our long-term subbing. It's just there's not a lot of them. If you got a couple teachers out, which I know we're going to later in the year, and then you gotta make sure you can get to those people, and sometimes then they have conflicts, and right now those conflicts end up them having to make a decision on whether they want to do it or not, because they're going to have to be gone a day or whatever that may be, and we don't want that decision to have to be made. We want to have those good people coming in and work for us.
I think it makes sense if they're gonna be here for the long haul,
Right.
to just start them instead of waiting on 10 days.
Yeah.
you know.
No decisions have to be made tonight. Just wanted to talk about it and kind of create a discussion. If there's ideas or thoughts that you have that we're missing before we talk about possible policy changes. November school board election, our candidate filing deadline is coming up. It's this Thursday at 5 p.m. For anyone who has taken out papers to file those back with Mary Beth by 5 p.m. on Thursday. By September 21st, candidates would still be able to withdraw. Our election then is the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, November 2nd. Then we would have our Tier 1 canvass of votes on the 8th or 9th, and the Tier 2 canvass of votes on the 15th or 16th. So the second canvass of votes will not be done by our November board meeting, which that's what's happened 2 years ago as well. So our organizational meeting will be in December with the new board. I've put in a memo a couple weeks ago about a needs assessment. School districts in Iowa are required to have a district's needs assessment. It's part of the Iowa Code. The district has not had one, hasn't had a formal assessment in a number of years. I think this is something for us to consider for this year. The Iowa Association of School Boards does offer an all-inclusive comprehensive service that will completely manage our needs assessment. They'll post our survey online, they'll report the responses, the response rates, they'll download and clean and analyze all your data and prepare the presentations for us for $1,700. So I think that's a pretty good rate for all the work that they put into it, and it would provide some really valuable information for us as a district. So that's something we're going to look at here in the next few months.
Are the survey questions generated locally? Ideas from ISB and then locally input to determine the format?
Yeah, it can be really what you choose. They can generate them locally. They can generate themselves. If we have specific stuff that we want to include, we can give them those questions and they can do that also. Okay.
Anything else then, Joe?
Nope.
Or any other discussion that we had? All right, we'll then move on to communications to the board and talking briefly about our superintendent goals that we'll be kind of going through next month.
Over the next few weeks, I will send out the goals that we had for myself last year. Those are all tied to district goals. Let you guys look at those, and then if you have ideas for new goals, you can send those to Rodney with the idea that we'll develop my annual goals at the October board meeting. So if you have any ideas, you can send those to Rodney. We'll generate some thoughts by sending out the old goals here in the next few weeks.
I'll probably send out a reminder before the meeting too, before, so to remind us of all that. Okay, administrative report. Tonight we have Mr. Sudol and Ms. Roberts with us tonight.
Yep.
Yep. It helps.
All right. As you can see up there, our presentation tonight is on restorative practices and kind of our journey from where we started back from 2019 to our present time. Mrs. Roberts is a big part of our restorative practices. That's why I recruited her today to come along and help me present. So.
Okay, so our counseling team kind of started a few years back in the counseling conference that we go to. We started hearing a lot about trauma-informed care. And so we saw Tanya from Cedar Rapids at one of those conferences, and we thought this would be great to bring back to the district. So she came, and one of the big parts of the background of trauma is the ACEs. Okay. Okay, just kind of show that poster there. So right there, so it's just a good graphic of showing what ACEs is. So it's adverse childhood experiences, and they did a study on the things that kids have gone through in their life and how those experiences affect them later. So they kind of talk about the more that the ACEs that you would have, it's kind of what health conditions you'll have later in life. So you can scroll down a little bit further. Yep. It's kind of how they kind of put this one into with a car. So it's kind of like when we have all this stress happening, it's like what a car would be when it's revving up for days. So that's kind of where when we have a lot of ACEs, a lot of stuff that's happening to our kids, they're constantly in this toxic stress. And that definitely affects them in how they go through their day at school, and then obviously it's going to affect them later in life. Yep, go ahead. And so there's a lot of things that we can do to reduce the effects of it. Obviously we can't always take away all that stress, but the whole point of then trauma-informed care and what we're working with restorative practices is trying to make those connections now with kids so that when they are going through things, we may know about it a little bit more, and we can talk about it a little bit more. It's just all based on those connections and relationships. So that's kind of that was where the start was. Then if you want to go to the ACEs study, So scroll a little bit. It's kind of, and I guess you guys can kind of look at this, but it's really kind of with that preventing the ACEs. So just kind of like I said, strengthening, financial security, family-friendly work policies. So us kind of being aware of economic supports to families, kind of our community. Public education, bystander approaches. These are just different things that can happen in the community. Early childhood home visitations, those have kind of changed lately too, but having childcare, preschool. But then here, these kind of skills is kind of where we can start happening in school. Our SEL learning, like we have second step in our elementary up to our middle school. Having parenting skills, these are things that we can have too, mentoring after school programs. So those are all kind of the things that can kind of help us with the stuff that's already happening, but maybe lower those ACEs or kind of help them out along the way when they have those things happening as well. And then the next one, it does have the ACEs questions. If you're not familiar with those, but you can kind of look at them. There's 10 questions. It's the same for everybody. Yep. And you can kind of just scroll if you guys want to look at those. I don't have to read them to you, but
So this should be linked to the agenda too, so
Yep.
if you want to look at it later, we have.
yeah. But really, I mean, when you go through those, there's very few people that are going to have an ACE score of 0. Most people are going to have a 1 or more, but we have kids that would already in the elementary school, just from what I may know, that are going to have an ACE score of 5. And that's pretty high or more. So there's a lot of stuff our kids are going through where if the toxic stress continues and they don't find ways to kind of get through that and learn some different skills, that's what's going to cause health problems later. So when you think about what is trauma, so it's any experience that leaves a person feeling hopeless, helpless, fearing for their life, survival, safety, and this experience can be real or perceived, and it occurs on a sensory level. So it's kind of important to know that there's no scorecard when it comes to trauma, so it's not like, hey, I have more than you have, because I kind of like the analogy that everybody has a plate, some of our plates are bigger than others, so some are going to fill up a lot faster than the person next to them just because it's side of that plate. So it doesn't matter if it's big trauma or little trauma, it's all in how it affects me. And again, how I perceive it and then how I move through it.
Do you think there's an issue about real or perceived? I might feel perceived, like Brent treated me unfairly when he might not have.
Mm-hmm.
So I see some concerns with some of that stuff, to be quite honest.
And I think honestly, but you can't take away the perceived, again, kind of thinking of that plate where, yeah, you might be able to handle it a little bit more than the person next to you, but then that's where the resiliency skills come in and our skills that we're learning how to problem solve, how to calm down. Like, that's where all of that comes in where, and I have that connection. I know that I have this person, I've been through this before, I can talk about it. So, you're right, like I may look at it and be like, well, that really wasn't a big deal, but to you it is, and we can't really take away your feeling in it and your perception of it, because that's your reality. My reality is yours.
I think later on we'll be talking too about kind of building that relationship with that kid and how you do handle those situations and some of that too.
Yep. Okay, so then I kind of went to that resilience part. You know, we talked about how do some kids get through it and some kids it's harder for them. So we can't take away what's happened and we might not be able to change it, but we can help foster that resilience in every interaction. And that's kind of what Mr. Siddle was talking about. But we can always cultivate those pathways of resilience, the connections, the relationships. That's where we start building where that resilience is so we can get through it next time.
Then the summer of 2019, then Mrs. Roberts, myself, a few other teachers, and some middle school staff, and Mr. Roder as well, went to a conference in Dubuque It was a trauma-informed conference, and you can read those things up there, the traditional versus the restorative. I'll give you a second to look at those. Probably the biggest one that we were talking, Mrs. Roberts and I were meeting, talking, getting prepared for tonight is the rules and intent outweigh whether the outcome is positive or negative versus the restorative, which the offender is responsible for harmful behavior, repairing harm and working forward toward the positive outcome. Then I guess the last one too, no opportunity for remorse or amends, the opportunity given for amends and the expression of remorse. We're trying to build that empathy with the kids.
So then we kind of went into the why of this. So, we liked learning about the trauma-informed care. So, okay, here's kids with trauma, so now what was kind of our next step? Like, what do we do now? So that's where it led us to restorative practices. So, truly, it's just promoting relationships and connections. It's looking at the whole story. It's not just, a kid coming to say, this is what happened, and you just say, okay, or here's the consequence of that. Not that always happens, but it gives us a chance to really learn how to ask them questions and find out what happened and get the whole story.
I think the listening part, especially at the
Yes.
beginning, instead of just automatically jumping to a consequence or something, that listening part, giving them the chance to be heard before dealing with the situation.
Yep. I think we started learning, the de-escalating part of things and how kids can problem solve a little bit better, and just working through that. Like right now, at the elementary, it's definitely probably having an adult to mediate it and work through problems that way, but your goal is the older they get, they can solve it themselves, and just be comfortable in doing that, have that ability. This was just a good way to kind of think of restorative practices. So, but basically, we're happier and more cooperative when we have positives around us, and when people in authority want to do things with us rather than to us. And I think when we think of that as adults, the bosses that we have, I think it's similar. You want to work with the people that are around you. You don't want someone to tell you what to do. So it's the same with kids. Okay, and then the big part here, what we were kind of doing in the fall of 2020 is really when Mr. Sudol was talking about talking through a problem. So this gave us really good questions to talk with kids. How do you talk with them through a problem and giving them a chance to speak? So the restorative questioning, it gives us a better picture rather than just decide on consequences right away. But we really look at what happened. What were you thinking of at the time? What have you thought about since? Who's been affected? That's kind of a big one, because we just think it's just all about me, and that's just developmentally what kids do. But this gives them a chance to think, okay, well, yeah, the teacher even now, who is affected by that? And then what do you think you need to do to make things right? Also kind of a hard one with kids, they automatically just say, I'm sorry. Well, sorry doesn't always fix it. It's a first step, but I know in the elementary too, we're really working on, giving them options too. What are some of their ideas of what you can do to make things right?
So Mrs. Roberts mentioned the de-escalation. We also had de-escalation training then in the winter of 2020 with the AEA. And actually those are the behaviors, the levels of behavior that our kids go through. It first starts off with anxiety. For example, maybe you notice a kid that's finger tapping at the table, just recognizing those behaviors. How are you supportive to it? Maybe you're walking over to them, asking them, is there something we can help you with, or is it something you need to take a break with? Maybe in the next level, that doesn't work with some of the supportive things. It goes to the defensive level. When it's defensive, that raises the bar a little bit. That's where you want to set limits. So that's a lot of times where we use the if-then statement, we call it. So if you finish this, then you can go for recess. Those type of statements that we use with the kids. Then after that, obviously, the next level is physically acting out. We have emergency response procedures. We have which is Chapter 103. We have to follow certain rules and protocols within the school with that. We have a team in each building. It's CPR CPI team, Crisis Prevention Intervention. And in that team, then they're all trained. So if we would ever have to physically restrain a kid, that's our very last resort that we'd ever want to do. But if we have to do that, we have a certain team in place, we have certain laws and rules that we have to follow with that. Anytime the behavior comes up to you, even the physical acting out, there's always tension reduction. And with tension reduction, the kids usually, it's maybe they're crying, and they're sitting down crying, and they're done with the behavior, they're crying through it, but you also want to reestablish that communication with them. So going back to those questions that we talked about before, what happened, what were you thinking at the time? Those questions that we have from our restorative practices helps us reestablish that communication with the kid. Kind of the next one then is where we are now. So as a staff, we've developed what I call big rocks. So what are our big rocks that we have that we believe in as a staff, and what are our action steps to get there? So, a little bigger there. There we go. So our big rocks that we came up with, you can read those up there, what we believe in restorative practices, and each building's a little bit different. They're pretty much the same concepts, but a little bit different with the wording on it. But we developed the big rocks, and then from there, if you scroll down a little bit, there's, I guess we have action steps, which will be on a poster, which I'll show you in a second. This is when harm is caused. Whose responsibility is it? The students, the staff, administrator, families. This is something we just started this year. What is our process for when harm is caused? How do we repair that harm? So if you go to, Joe, if you want to go to the posters at the end, actually, the next slide. These are the posters that are what we developed. In the middle of those circles are the big rocks, and then those puzzle pieces along the outside are our action steps. Those are the actions that staff and as students we expect to see out of each other in the building. And that way you know what it should look like. Every room has one of these posters at the buildings, and they also have, it's all over as a good visual reminder for us and for staff and for students with that. I did send a letter out this year to parents too, to help communicate with restorative practices as well. So if you go back to one slide, it's a letter to parents. So in this letter, it talks about our process with restorative practices. It talks about repairing harm. It talks about those questions there on what happened, what were you thinking about at the time, what were you feeling, what are you feeling now. Just we want to make sure we're clear with parents on how we're handling things at school and the process that it is. If an suspension ever does happen, which we're not big believers in suspension with elementary, but if a suspension does happen, how do we reestablish that communication by having those parents come in and have a meeting with us to help with repairing that harm that was caused that day before or days before with that. That's kind of process we're continuing right now to look at that repairing harm right now, and that'll be kind of what we'll be doing on the 22nd, building on that and practicing what that looks like, and probably doing some role playing with it too on what that looks like with students at the schools who are all consistent with our message on how we deal with kids.
I know it's something else that we didn't really put in there, but one of the big things with it is our community circles that elementaries are doing. Every classroom is doing that. It's a big piece. That's where the connection and the relationships come from. I was telling Mr. Sudo, it's great for me, just in my position as the counselor, that teachers get a little bit more information now, even just from their circles, with how do you feel this morning, how are you feeling in the morning or in the afternoon. And kids sometimes just spill, sometimes they can talk a lot about things, and so then a teacher can easily come to me and say, hey, can you check with this kid? This is what they said, and sometimes, the teacher can do it too, but sometimes they don't have time. So that's where I can come in, and so I appreciate that. They just have a better feel, and that's the point of it. They're supposed to. That's the family that they build in that year. That's gives them one more adult that they can trust and learn and be around. So that's kind of a cool thing with this restorative service too. You guys have any questions?
What kind of consequences? I get the trauma-informed care as a former current foster parent too, and dealing with kids with trauma. I lived it for a long period of time. But we also had consequences for behaviors too. What is still helping kids understand and learn to use their higher up brains rather than the primitive brains. I mean, that's all important, but kid misbehaves regardless of the scenario, right?
Yep.
Okay? Help the kid understand why he did that, talk them through, get their feelings, understand why they did it. It's all important. Is there consequences?
Yeah, a lot of time is, for elementary kids, a lot of their time, their value time, their recess, they'll like to take recess away, but it's also that, if they didn't do their math homework during math time, we might take recess time and finish that math homework up and talk about it. I think the restorative part is that building that understanding of it, but I agree, I think there has to be a consequence. We always talk about the behavior, there's a consequence for the behavior, so, I'm dealing with that and working through that type of thing. I think it depends on what the behavior is or what happens with it on the consequence. We try to make it called a logical consequence, but if you're going to miss the anything math, you're not getting math done. You're going to miss some value time of yours, that'd be something you enjoy where you're going to finish the math up.
We've had a lot of kids, make mess in the lunchroom, they have to help clean up in the lunchroom, mess up in the bathroom, we have to help clean up in the bathroom. So, that's kind of the logical consequences coming to that just makes sense with what happened.
That's just the behavior.
Yeah, but it's hard, there's not always a whole lot to take, but,
I just think that's an important part of learning.
Yeah.
There's a consequence to your actions because
Yeah.
that's what the real world is going to.
And if we ever have a student that messes up the room, put the room back together. That's part of the consequence with that. If you're going to do that, then there's a consequence you will be picking it up.
So this makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, how do you guys measure success? How do you know that it's being impactful?
That's a good question. We talked about that administratively back in the spring last year, more or less. The 3rd grade through 11th grade has the conditions for learning survey. For us in the elementary, we really don't have a survey to get how the kids are feeling. So we have developed a Google form where the kids go and fill out a Google form on it to kind of rate that too. That's something we're going to try to make sure, we messed with it a little bit last year. That's something I'd like to use this year, then have the staff look at that data to see how we're doing. Maybe are there areas we need to, what are we doing well? What are areas we want to improve on?
Mrs. Eischen, can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, and we're also kind of from a system view, looking at where we're at as a district on kind of a continuum of where we want to be, optimizing these practices to kind of where we're at now. So each building works to kind of score themselves, and we have a couple target actions and where are we at now and what are 1 or 2 things to get us a little further down the line next time. So kind of measuring success with students, but then also we need to look at our system view of how is this working across our buildings and eventually across our district as well. So kind of success coming in on what are we doing so that the students are seeing success as well. So twofold.
So as you can tell, we got to the point last year, we were in year 2 of some of this professional development work and these initiatives, and we started to ask ourselves a lot of questions on if we are what we're doing, is it impacting our kids, or is it impacting them positively, and how do we know if it is? So we've put real concrete things in place for this year so we can measure. We can measure from where we're at to where we're going and continue through our continuum of where we want to be. And we can get to the end of the year and we can see progress or not and decide what we have to do to continue to move in that direction, or if these are initiatives we want to continue with our kids.
And I would say, I am not the data person at all, that's other people, but I can say, just like I said, in my job, just knowing that the teachers hear more and know more, I think, than they ever have before. Just emotional vocabulary, kids are always now asked, how are you feeling, how are you doing? I was in a 2nd grade classroom today and they used the words disappointed and jealous and frustrated. That's not always the words that they use. A lot of times it's just the basic happy, mad, sad. And as you get older, you want to add that emotional vocabulary to your system because that helps you explain what's going on more. That I can understand what's happening a little bit more. So I think that's something in the right direction, just that kids are able to speak it more. Is it perfect? No. They're still going to get mad and not know what just happened, but they're able to talk about it a little bit more, I think that's definitely the right direction, so.
And I was glad to hear you bring up the friendship circles or community circles or whatever you called them. Because I think it was Mrs. Schucher who
Mhm.
talked to us about that
Yep,
last year.
yep.
Yeah.
So I was glad to hear how that all worked into.
Yeah, and that's like I said, Jill, at third and fourth grade level, that's kind of where I hear it even a little bit more. It's just that third and fourth graders are getting older and they're at like a good stage where they can kind of open up a little bit more. But you wouldn't do that if you didn't trust your teacher. You wouldn't do it if you didn't trust your class. I mean, they're saying this stuff in front of 25 kids and you just don't always do that. So I think that shows that you know, they trust the people that they're around to say that and talk about it.
Any other questions? Well, we do thank you for your time tonight. It's wonderful to hear about all this. So thank you again, Mrs. Roberts, Mr. Segal. All right, we'll kind of move right on to new business and talk about one of the policies earlier, but we'll go over some of the 400 series.
Yeah, we'll start with the 400 series. It's just the first reading tonight. 400 series is the employment series. So we'll continue to review one series per month. There's no motion or no approval tonight. Just something that you would need to do between now and October is to go and look at the 400 series, see is there anything in there that doesn't look right. I'll review that as well, and I'll send you links to those. This sub-policy is part of the 400 series, so that works into ours pretty conveniently for this cycle. So this is just simply the first reading. If you see anything in the 400 series that you'd like to review, edit, or change, let me know, and we'll do that at the October meeting.
All right, any other questions? Okay. B is board policy revisions and updates.
Now, this is continuing the process we started last month, where there were 19 different policies and rescissions of 3 policies that were taking place because of legislative changes last session. So we're continuing that. We're all the way up to policy 6062, which is actually a new policy. So it's not a change. It's a policy we didn't have. So in 2021, the legislature made changes to school ceremonies to require each school in grades 1 through 12 to display the United States flag and administer the Pledge of Allegiance. So that's the new policy. It didn't exist for us before. And then in red is what the actual policy is. So there is a little bit more to include that, you still have observances of holidays that are important in our culture, in our community, such as Christmas and Halloween and Easter, for example. We have now administer the Pledge of Allegiance in all grade levels. That was already being done in all the elementaries anyway. It's just a change to the middle school and high school. 701.2. This policy language was updated to reflect the increased flexibilities of our district to transfer certain funds that didn't get spent into a flexibility account. So you can take things from the TLC, for example, and you could move them into the general fund, for example. Same thing with preschool, I believe, and TAG. Those are a few of the funds that you can be flexible and move into others. We have never done that, and I probably would have some hesitation with most of those. I guess every situation would be unique to itself, but it is something that is now legal to do. So if we were ever going to do that, we would come to you and talk about a transfer from one fund to the other, the reason for it, and why we wanted to do that. 711.2, student conduct on transportation. There's just a few changes in red. It's really that our current policy allowed for video cameras. The change is to any recording devices. So it's not just video cameras, which we do have on our buses, but the change now to recording devices is what the ISB recommendation is. As technology changes and so on, it's not just isolated to a video camera. 803.1, getting rid of obsolete equipment. There's a number of changes that were made to increase the flexibility for a district when getting rid of equipment or property. There's now a higher threshold for determining when we may dispose of equipment, and then the publication requirements have been reduced. So again, in red, obsolete equipment or property other than real property, such as land, with having a value of no more than $25,000. It used to be $5,000. May, that's always key in policy, right? That it can happen, may be sold or disposed of in a manner determined by you guys, or myself, or a designee. A designee may be the AD, for example, and getting rid of old jerseys is a pretty good example for that. We can get rid of them through an auction, through a bid. We can just get rid of them, something that needs to be thrown away. It can be a first come, first serve. We can give it to a nonprofit. However, if we are simply going to sell them, then we need to publicize it. Okay? We need to publicize that we're going to do it in our local paper. It really doesn't happen very much because we really don't just simply straight out sell things very often. It would probably more likely come from one of these other modes.
I've got a question on how that's written. The way
Okay.
I'm reading it is anything up to $25,000 would have to be determined by the board.
Or the superintendent and their designee.
Okay. What happens if it's over $25,000?
Then it has to come here. We can't get rid of anything with that value without coming here. Yeah. Going on to 804.6, this is another new policy, the use of recording devices on school property. The Iowa Association sample policy covers recording devices on all district policies. It's intended to provide guidance on two separate categories of recordings, those generated by the district, such as our video cameras, for example, and then those not generated by the district, such as on someone's cell phone. This is an optional policy, but I do think it would be something that would be valuable for us. There certainly are areas where video can't take place. Those are included in the policy. They're included but not limited to the nurse's office, restrooms, locker rooms, changing areas, and so on.
Who'd be accountable for this policy? Like ensuring that we're maintaining the recordings for a certain period of time?
Yeah, I'd say administrative. I know in our buses, Merrill does that. In our video cameras, it's all on our servers and it cycles through for so long. So really we set those devices up that we have them for that period of time.
Gotcha.
Then our last one, that is the recording one, is 905.3. Again, this is a new policy, and this is also not a required policy. So both 905.3 and 804.6, we do not have to add. Okay, that is up to the board. 905.3 in 2021, the legislature decriminalized a number of specific instances where individuals may carry firearms on school grounds. So currently, our policy would be that you cannot. The new IASB sample policy is an example of regulating the carrying of firearms. Again, I want to note that this is entirely optional. It's up to the district on what we do with this. Here is the policy as written by the Iowa Association of School Boards. Exception to this policy include weapons carried by the following individuals. I think this is key in the performance of their official duties. Law enforcement, military personnel, correction officers, and then I guess others improved in writing by the superintendent. So it would have to be as part of what they do for those people. That is the last of these policies. Let you remember last month, we had a motion for the first reading and the second reading to approve. We can do that. We do need to decide if we want to add the two new policies in this case. So your motion could reflect to add them as presented, or your motion could be to add the changes excluding the new, however you wanted to do that.
So this weapons policy, the last bullet, so like the shooting sports activities, so if they're trap shooting.
Yep.
They have to, if I'm reading it right, they have to get permission from you.
Yep.
To have their gun in their car.
Yep.
Truck.
Legally cased. Yep.
The coaches, I think, are pretty accommodating towards students, towards this already. You know, and they make it work for students, you know, as far as storing guns. I talked to one kid on the trap team this week. I mean, he stores his gun at a shop across town, you know, when he comes to town, so he has to go, you know, there after school. I mean, some kids have to go back home and then go there. So this would, again, I mean, it's in writing ahead of time. They still have to legally store their gun properly.
Yeah.
You know, in a case, unloaded. You know, this would not apply to different carry permits and different things. I mean, it's still the written approval ahead of time by it. So, you know, it's like at first glance, you're like, oh my goodness. But, I mean, this is a state thing. This is written by Iowa Association of School Boards as far as a sample policy, right?
Correct, correct.
So this is kind of what they're saying would be appropriate.
And I think this last bullet, Gloria, it's an important one to talk about. I'm glad you did, because that's a major change from what we have right now, is that a child who is part of our trap shooting club, they cannot have their shotgun in their car on our grounds. That would be against school board policy. This would allow them to do that if they've gotten that approved ahead of time.
And then we talked about, I mean, how does then the coaches then relay this to the students to know that they got to go through you to?
Yep, you know, we would have to work with our coaches, and our coaches are very good and
Yeah.
very supportive of them, making sure they're doing the right things, that this would be another appropriate way for them to be prepared for practice.
So I think that would be the major change of this policy.
That would, no question, that would be the major change.
So we can still discuss, but I'll motion to approve as presented here tonight. You know, with the weapons policy there, I mean, right now, police officer on duty by our policy cannot carry a weapon on grounds, which they probably have. And so they're in violation of our policy. We probably have kids that are storing guns in their trunks and are hiding it. You know, we're giving them an opportunity to be responsible and to not be in violation of the policy. Because if we found a kid that was that would be
Yes.
mandatory suspension.
Yes.
I mean, no questions asked. Where this way, I mean, now it is the kid's fault because there was a way to provide. There's really no excuse. And so I'm in favor of.
And we know who's has.
Yep.
We know who has, yeah.
It's responsibility. I mean, individuals approved by writing the superintendent, I'm sure that's going to be pretty, and again, it has to be, I can't even foresee a circumstance where that's the case, right? You can't carry a gun, you still can't carry a gun.
Right,
You know,
right.
it still has to be stored properly, those sorts of things. So I think I'm in favor of it. They're good changes, they teach responsibility, they prevent from being in violation of our current policy.
I agree.
My thoughts.
So
I'll
you're,
second.
so we're approving the policy as written by the ISD,
As presented.
As presented.
As presented.
Yep. And then we're approving the first and second reading, so this can be also at the same time. So, all right, we have a motion by Brent, second by Andrea then. Is there any further discussion? I only have one quick question. You know, we've added a lot of recording devices of all the areas that we've built and that. Do we still have good coverage? Do we feel we've got gaps that we need to add? You know, maybe that's not something.
We have stuff that points in that direction. I think we'll probably have to look at maybe even installation one on the gateway. We did run fiber out there, so we have the capabilities to do all that stuff. But yeah, we'll have to make sure we can, because we did create a lot of area that's away from the building.
Sure.
But it should be well lit when we're done.
Yeah.
But
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, let's say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Good discussion. Out-of-state travel by our high school band.
our high school band is planning an out-of-state trip to the Wasika Marching Classic on September 18th. This trip will include 75 band students. It's a great competition. It'll provide our band students with an opportunity to get some feedback from some quality judges, as well as getting the experience of performing for a very, very supportive and large crowd. It'll help them in preparing for our band day as well as the state competition. So I do recommend the approval of our out-of-state high school band trip.
So moved.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Our added item, the request for modified allowable growth and supplemental aid.
Yeah, school districts request allowable growth and supplemental aid for a negative special education balance for the past school year. The supplemental aid payment is calculated by the Department of Management after all special ed balances have been finalized, which is why this is a late addition to the agenda, because we got that number literally at 3 o'clock today. Our number is $487,368. That is almost $500,000 less than the previous year. So we have done a really good job of reducing our special ed deficit, which is certainly has been something we've been working hard at, and we'll continue to. So this is a good movement in the right direction. So we are requesting modified allowable growth from the Department of Ed for $487,368.84.
This has been common practice of the board.
Yep.
And this isn't money, this is actually just, we get the.
Authority.
We get the
Yeah.
authority.
Yeah.
We need to do it.
Yes.
There's no option.
Sure.
Yeah.
We need to get it down to zero,
Yeah.
from $1 million to zero, but we have no option. You
Yeah.
have to take the allowable growth.
Right.
If you don't, it's a terrible decision.
Yeah, the decision would be then you're just taking that money directly out of your,
You're losing it.
yeah, you're losing those dollars, yeah,
Can't do it.
out of your general fund, yeah.
So where's the money come from? It comes from the state, right? Or is it, it's authority to spend, I understand that, but.
Property taxes, yeah.
Because there can be something in your budget preparation, you can ask for, within the formula guidelines, you can do cash reserves to build things back up.
Right, right.
But this is strictly the authority to spend, is what it is.
Right.
We've overspent by $500,000, which is far better than the previous years.
Yep.
But it needs to be also addressed to get it further down to or closer to zero.
And this also relates to one of our, if you go back to platform planks with the IASB, we talked about special ed funding. You know, most districts in the state operate in a special ed deficit, and it's because special ed funding in our state is so low. You know, it doesn't fund the services that we have to provide for kids. That's why we have this situation. Us continuing to do everything we can to reduce it is very, very important for us being responsible, and we are, but that's why special ed deficits occur.
Is IASB, or is that one of the things they're lobbying for?
They probably will. I will tell you, it's always far-reaching because it's expensive, right? You know, if you're going to increase those special ed weights, you know, that's, you know, how we always want supplemental state aid to be 3% and so on. Well, if we're going to increase our special ed weightings, that's just money out of that pool. You know, there's only so much money, and that's why it's so tough. But it needs to be reformed at some point. Otherwise, this continues to be a burden that's on the taxpayers of our state, not just of Algona, of our state.
Well, I'm not, I agree. I mean, I'll make a motion to approve it because I understand the importance of it. But I'm trying to understand where this money comes. So if we said no, you know, if we said we're not going to approve this, I understand that we would have a deficit, that we would be taking money from our general fund and other issues. But if we approve it, we're getting the authority to spend money that we've gotten from however we've collected money.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
property tax or state supplemental aid or whatever. If we said no, and we still have to do it, you know, we still have to pay it because we got to give a service to our kids.
Yeah, our unspent balance would go down at least $500,000.
Okay. But by approving it,
That keeps that authority there.
keeps the authority to tax, property tax, or does that keep the authority that the money
spend.
come in?
We have the authority to spend then. You know, as our unspent authorized budget, UAB, you know, that operates in a positive. You know, as that goes down to zero, you know, then you don't have any authority to spend over that. You know, that's when we're in big trouble. You know, we don't want to.
Your credit card?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, we'd be decreasing our limit and, you know, getting closer to the zero, and we're not close to zero, but you're headed in that direction. That's why, you know, you can't, like Tom said, you can't not do it. If you did it 2 years in a row, you'd probably be
I mean,
looking at the school budget review committee and, you know,
If we have a $2 million unspent budget, and we did it 4 years in a row.
yeah, it would double though, so it'd be
Yeah,
2
okay,
years.
yeah.
2 years.
Yeah.
2 years we'd be done.
We'd be done.
Yep.
The money is coming from somewhere, though. Like, we get $500,000 from somewhere.
We tax for the cash reserve every year, you know, and we tax in the amount to make up for these, but what our authority doesn't decrease this amount by doing what we're doing here. That's the key part to this.
They add that negative amount onto the unspent balance. They add it right back in.
There's money.
It's funny.
The special ed is,
No, I get it a little bit, but it's just doesn't.
And it's not an easy concept, I don't think, at all.
I forgot, special ed head count is November,
Yeah.
in November
October.
sometime, October special ed.
It's the last part of October.
Okay. So that special ed head count comes in the weightings, October of 2021, determines the 22-23 budget for special ed. And kids can move in and out during that whole year time, and more kids getting special services and increased weightings, but the money is already set for 2023. And this is part of the situation, and could be part of this also. So you're not getting any additional monies if services are increased or new kids moving in. It can help, it builds this deficit. So it's just underfunding, and because you're budgeting 1 year in advance, you can't make up any differences in money if kids need more services. It's part of the program, it's been forever. I don't see any changes in it. It needs to be changed, but I don't see it happening.
This is something that I certainly talk to our local representatives about. They know this is a burden on schools and ultimately taxpayers. But the solution is so expensive, and that it's hard for them to move in that direction, even though they know at some point it's going to have to. At some point, the weightings have to change to match the services that children need.
Don't seem to come in needing less services.
No.
Usually
No.
there's quite a few needs So, Brent, are you then?
Yeah, I'll motion.
Okay,
I'll second.
thank you. We have a motion and second then for the modified allowable growth supplemental aid. Is there any discussion? Further, I should say. All right, hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. On to open enrollment.
We have 16 open enrollments on the list. And this also creates an opportunity for us to talk about, there are some open enrollment law changes for this year. Really, they all fall under the just cause. You know, there is just cause for us to approve open enrollments after the March 1st deadline. We actually have 8 of them on this list. There's 8 just cause approvals on this list. So the first 8 are all open enrollments into the district. 9 through 16 are open enrollments out of the district. All of those are students who are requesting open enrollment due to recent family moves, or students in kindergarten, which has a different deadline of September 1st. So for example, a student attended District B, and then they moved to Algona. We legally have to approve them to open enroll back to District B. So
Regardless of the time of the year.
regardless of the time of the year. Yeah, that's a just cause reason for us that we have to approve. So we have those on here, and we have some kindergarten. Again, kindergarten's got the September 1 deadline. So all of these are, like always, they're on the agenda for your approval, although legally they all have to be approved.
What if somebody's moved 2 years ago out of the district? Can they go back to the previous district then?
Not on 2 years, it would be,
Within a year?
yeah.
I make a motion to approve the open enrollment.
Thank you, Andrew. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thanks, Tom. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Open enrollment's approved. New contracts.
We have 10 new contracts. Michelle Stone, Teacher Associate at Bryant Elementary. Suzanne Redding, Food Service. Serena Chata, Teacher Associate at Lucia Wallace. Oh, yes, yep. Olivia Rochlow, Teacher Associate at Bryant Elementary. Heidi Schnackenberg, Teacher Associate at the middle school. Heather Fowler is Food Service and Transportation Associate. There's different rates for those. I listed both of those in your general information. Patrick Wolter, Transportation Associate. Patrick already works for us as a Teacher Associate. This would just be an additional Transportation Associate contract, which is a different rate. Teresa Walter, Transportation Associate, same thing, different rate for the transportation part because she works for us as a Teacher Associate. Angela Reisner, Teacher Associate at Garrigan. And Justine Garman, Teacher Associate ELTA in the high school, position that we just haven't, actually all of them are just positions that we had not had filled yet.
Well, we're doing way better than our agency and others. I can help. So that's great.
We're close to a filled staffing. You know, we went the entire year last year without a full staff. We're getting close right now, but certainly hiring continues to be a challenge, as it is for everyone.
All right, we need a motion to approve new contracts.
Motion to approve new contracts?
Thanks, Brian. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Lori. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And resignations.
We have 4. Shannon Strucker is Teacher Associate in the middle school. Michael Stentz in Transportation. Brittany Howland, Teacher Associate at Garrigan. And Julie Seawick, Teacher Associate at the middle school.
So moved.
Thanks, Jay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Was that a second? Thanks, Brian. All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I believe we're at that adjourned motion. Any further thing, Joe? or
Nope,
we're-
that's
okay.
it.
Motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Brent. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
All right, Jay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for tonight. Good discussion. Yeah.
Brian?
How we doing?
Good.
It's gonna do that.
The last one.
Yeah.
State tax base.
Yeah.